Pass on my congratulations for another great webinar last week.
Thank you, Ken.
You bet. Very well done.
And thanks, Josh. That was all his presentation.
I think that was really in his wheelhouse. He is an arborist, and you could really see his background coming through. So that was a nice collaboration.
I couldn't stay for the whole thing, but yes, definitely when he got to talk about his theoretical trip to the landscape, to the nursery to buy plants, I could tell he was jazzed.
So I know, Dean, you had said that some folks said they were going to have to join late, but I think we'll get started and do
Yes.
sort of our intros and get it going. And then as people join, we can put them on the spot.
Yes, I was going to confirm that you do have a quorum and 2 people will be late, but you have a quorum achieved. And so away you can go.
Great. Well, we'll do the usual intros. So folks, please state your name, your organization, and if you're a voting member. I'll kick it off and I'll just call on people for to be expedited. Lindsay, the director of Missisquoi River Basin Association. I am chair of the committee and a voting member. Dean.
Dean Pierce, staff.
Sarah.
Sarah Downs, Enosburg, voting member.
Dan.
I'm voting member. Spell it
Kent.
right.
Oh.
Mhm.
Kent.
Oh, Kent Anderson, I'm a voting member. And Dean, could I ask you to turn your volume up a little bit? I'm having difficulty hearing you.
Heidi.
Heidi Bridge Valenta with the Village of Swanton. I'm a voting member.
Nora.
Laura Brown, I'm the Eco AmeriCorps member with NRPC.
Good.
Water project manager at NRPC.
Josh.
Josh Serpy, project manager, Friends of Northern Lake Champlain.
Lauren.
Franklin County NRCD, she, her pronouns, voting member.
Bridget.
Bridget Butler, Executive Director, Friends of Northern Lake Champlain. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a non-voting participant today.
Alaire.
Hi, I'm Alaire Diamond from Vermont Land Trust, and I am a voting member.
Mel.
Hi, I'm Mel. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with the Franklin County NRCD, non-voting.
Jim.
Jim Pease, Vermont DEC, retired. I do occasionally do contractual work up in Quebec.
Great, that's everybody on screen. So just a reminder about our Zoom norms. If you're able to, please change your name just to indicate who you are so that everybody knows who's speaking. Please do your best to have your camera on and be engaged. We understand that this will go through lunch, so no need to, obviously do what you're comfortable with. Raise your hand either virtually or physically for voting or as a request to speak. We'll be monitoring the chat function so you can put comments in there as well. And then do please mute to minimize background noise, especially we have a couple of presentations today. So that's, I think, yeah. Oh, good. Dean, you put it up. Yeah, thank you. So that's moving on for that. So Dean sent out the meeting packet. Thank you as ever to you and Nora for keeping us organized. Next up, conflict of interest. Anyone need to declare any conflicts today?
I don't believe that's likely because there aren't any applications, but I'll use this opportunity. Ken, is the audio better? Okay, thanks.
And then we've got that agenda in our packet. Folks hopefully got a chance to look at that. It was also included in the email, and Dean's putting it up on screen. So if there are any adjustments, speak now, and if not, we'll seek an approval. Sarah, is that a motion to approve?
Yes, it's a motion to approve.
Okay, I think I saw Dan. Was that a second? Okay, we have a motion from Sarah, a second from Daniel. All in favor of approving the agenda as written, please indicate by saying aye or raising your hand virtually or physically. I've got Kent, Lindsay, Sarah, Dan, scrolling down, Lauren, Alaire. Great. Thank you guys. Oh, and Heidi. Next up is minutes. Thank you guys again for writing these. Thanks, Nora, for capturing all of that and making it reviewable. Hopefully folks got a chance to read through. Please speak up if you have any corrections you need noted. And if not, we'll seek a motion to approve those as well. I'm seeing Sarah, got a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes.
Great. We've got a motion from Sarah. Looks like a second from Dan again. All in favor, please indicate. I've got Lindsay, Sarah, Kent, Dan, Heidi, Alaire. Excellent. Thank you all. Time for public comment, not related to items on the agenda. Hearing none, we'll move on to any budget adjustments needed. Dean.
And there are none.
Great. Glad to hear that. I expect that we'll have some in the future. Any seating of new representatives, Dean? Not this meeting.
And there are none.
Great.
Unless someone is here and I didn't know about it and they've been put forward to be an alternate or something like that, then no.
Great. Then we'll move on to private roads.
Yeah, so I will be delivering this presentation. Let me just and sent the sharing request. All right. And can you all see my presentation? Yes. Okay. Let me just play it from the beginning. Sorry, I gotta figure out how to get my notes ready. Okay, so everyone can see that and everyone can hear me? Cool.
Yes.
So we'll be talking about this private roads REI project that NRPC was recently awarded, go through its background, its goals, and its tasks. So starting with the background. So in summer of last year, DEC came out with this request for proposals for the development of a road erosion inventory methodology for private roads in the Lake Champlain Basin. As I'm sure many of you know, a huge portion of phosphorus that ends up in the watershed is coming from these back roads. And as of now, there's not really a methodology for reducing it through our clean water framework. Since these back roads are private and therefore unregulated, if we get a project coming online which allows us to calculate and deal with these back roads, they can be funded through the Clean Water Service Provider. So NRPC put in an application, was awarded the project, partially to do with our status as this regional body with the capacity to take on this type of work. But we thought we were particularly qualified due to previous work that we did with the Lake Carmi private roads REI project. So just a little bit background on that. So this was initiated in 2019 for a variety of reasons, including Lake Carmi's history of cyanobacteria blooms, a TMDL analysis aimed at reducing phosphorus loading in the lake, its designation as a lake in crisis under Act 168, and the publication of DEC's crisis response plan, which outlines the importance of treating stormwater from developed areas and private roads. So what do we do for this project? We developed a methodology for conducting REIs on private and park roads around Lake Carmi. We completed these REIs for all hydrologically connected segments of private and park roads. We prioritize these segments for BMP implementation based off of phosphorus reduction potential. So this involved using existing DEC prioritization methods associated with the MRGP, which is the baseline for conducting these REIs. But we were also in a position where we're having, I keep saying we, I was not here for this, but NRPC was having to add inputs to these prioritization methods from the MRGP for things that are particular to private roads, things like landowner willingness, likelihood of long-term success, and cost effectiveness. Since we're dealing with a much higher degree of atomized buy-in relative to public roads, we also had to develop education materials for outreach to these property owners. The big takeaway here is that it is not easy just to adapt the MRGP. Private roads are typically not constructed or managed like public roads, which I'm sure you all know. So aspects of the MRGP don't really fit either the physical aspects of the roads themselves or the reality of managing the roads, since there's a potential for a large amount of private owners. So this isn't clear by now why this is important. We're talking about a whole suite of projects that can be funded by the WISPr once this methodology work is completed. We already know that there's a lot of phosphorus being dumped into the basin from these roads. It's the reason why this study was initiated. And this kind of speaks to how the WISPr projects kind of come in waves as DEC, adapts their guidance and as new technologies for calculating phosphorus reduction come online. There's a potential for bursts of activity and funding different types of clean water projects. And, if we're able to complete this, and not if, when we complete this, this has the potential to be a pretty big wave of new clean water projects. So going into the work plan, the general timeline, and the tasks associated with this project, it'll be a generally two-phase work plan. The first is concerned with developing a mapping and evaluation methodology. The second with rolling out the actual inventory work and managing all of the moving pieces with DEC, the WISPr, watershed organizations, landowners, etc. We're anticipating finishing this first phase at the end of this year. Phase 2 deals with our ongoing responsibility managing this process, which will generally begin in spring of next year. Suffice to say, this will be a very big multi-year process. So going into phase 1, the tasks associated with it, the GIS data development. So this is going to involve establishing a repeatable framework and process for mapping private roads for the private roads REI program, which meets similar accuracy standards as the MRGP program. We need to develop a QAP, a quality assurance project plan, and get it approved by EPA. We have to meet with the ANR GIS team to identify 6 to 12 pilot HUC-12s to figure out the mapping process and the data sharing details, and then conduct pilot mapping in those areas. After these pilot areas are mapped, we can correct as needed and then map the rest of the basin. For the technical assistance program, we're going to be building a general knowledge of the road standards and how phosphorus reductions are credited for these back roads. We're going to be figuring out how to actually conduct an REI on the private roads, identifying a suite of BMPs to address erosion in these areas, and then develop and share resources for best communication and outreach practices to landowners about private road assessment, BMPs, regular road maintenance, and recommendations for contractors. And then for the standards and the AB recommendations, the standards we're going to be taking, I mentioned this a bit with the Lake Carmi project. Similarly, we're going to be taking the existing methodologies for the MRGP and also forest roads and trying to adapt them to back roads, which is going to be this ongoing process with DEC that we're trying to strike the right balance of finding something that is actually useful in calculating phosphorus reduction on these back roads and try to take the lessons we learned from the Lake Carmi project. Once these different standards are in place, we're going to adapt it to the existing REI app, which is built around the MRGP. This will involve adding these new areas to input information to help with prioritization that you wouldn't necessarily get with the MRGP inventories. So again, things like landowner willingness, cost effectiveness, or likelihood of success regarding maintenance needs. And then just going through the deliverables, like I mentioned, the QAP, these selection of these 6 to 12 priority HUCs and areas throughout Lake Champlain, or these HUC areas throughout the Lake Champlain Basin with the spatial data layer of non-regulated private roads, priority road network identification criteria, the selection of 12 to 20 priority road networks with spatial data, and then this technical assistance plan and materials for subsequent outreach events. Okay, moving to phase 2. So this is going to be the program management and implementation. So actually getting this project out and implemented. So we need to develop an RFQ to see who would be interested in conducting REIs for private road clusters across each subbasin. Establishing subcontracts with the qualified entities to ideally conduct 2 priority REIs on road clusters for each subbasin for a total of 12 to 20 REIs completed. From this, developing general information about the importance of water quality BMPs for landowners, and then conducting education and outreach events. Once again, emphasizing here, we're dealing with private land. It's not going to be as easy as having this public right-of-way that we already have buy-in from B-Trans or DEC in terms of getting work done on it. There needs to be this whole outreach apparatus connected with this to connect with the people who actually own this land. Overseeing subcontracts, tracking project progress towards completing all the milestones and deliverables, all that fun stuff. And then the stakeholder communication. So this will involve a high degree of coordination between the state, WISP, partners. So through that, developing the mechanisms for ongoing communications with DEC, landowners, various watershed organizations, contractors, etc. And then going to the deliverables, phase 2, I have a list of qualified subcontractors, spreadsheet of priority REI clusters and their status, watershed project database IDs for all the priority REI clusters, and then the subcontractor invoices. I know that was a lot of information that I just gave everybody very quickly. I'm wondering if Dean or anybody at NRPC, if there's anything I'm missing here, or if anybody has any other questions.
Cliff, I guess I'll jump in. Lindsay, sorry. Could you just take a little bit of time and explain how the inventory process works for the MRGP roads, just to give people some sense of what it would look like if you could talk people through the Survey 123 app or anything like that? It may still be a little bit abstract to people. And I didn't know if you would be able to just talk about how the app is used to collect information, which is essentially the basis for determining if a road meets or partially meets or does not meet the required standard.
Right. And I've gone out and done a couple of these and I've read about it, but I'm not pretending to be an expert here. The MRGP works now when you conduct these REIs that I get this workflow a little bit confused, but it works in that you go out and inventory the road and you record things like the culverts in the area, the grade of the road, the observed erosion, things like that you can then put into the Survey 123 app. From there, it'll tell you whether or not this road segment meets MRGP compliance, and then that can lead to prioritization of work done on that road. Is that what you're talking about, Dean?
Yeah, because I mean, this study that you described is basically aimed at getting us to a point where for private roads, we have the same kind of confidence in the system. So right now, I should step back. Right now, private roads work can be done, but the assessment is borrowed from the MRGP system. There is a distinct system for forest roads, and that's something that's coming online. And so you can think about it as first there was an assessment system for town highways, and that was the subject of a set of regulations, the MRGP. So that's why it was developed first. And then there was investment in a system for assessing forest roads, and that's further along than where we are with private roads. There's going to be some training coming online and emphasis on that in the next few months. And then further behind is private roads, which up to this point has been borrowing the system used for town highways. So I just thought that if people had some understanding, and maybe people for other parts of their lives have some knowledge of the MRGP system, and some of what you've said is more clear, but if they haven't, it may just be useful to explain that people walk around with this app and they're looking at the road, they're doing an inventory of the road and entering in that information, and like Cliff said, it's spitting out an assessment or a determination of, does this road meet the standard that's expected, or does it partially meet, or does it not meet? And that category, meets, does not meet, partially meets, is the basis for how much phosphorus reduction. So if a road meets the standard, you don't really need to do anything. If it partially meets and you bring it up to meets, well, that's an improvement, and the research has been done that says how many kilograms of phosphorus are reduced by going from partially meets to meets. And then if a road doesn't meet standard at all and you bring it up to fully meets, well, that's a bigger improvement. And so you would expect, and it would be the case, that you're going to get more phosphorus reduction credit for doing things that bring it from not meeting to fully meeting. Anyway, I thought maybe, and I'll step aside because I see that Lauren got her hand up, and so maybe it'll be more helpful to just have a particular question from the audience.
Thanks, Dean and Cliff. I guess I just wanted to say I was in the LCVP TAC committee meeting this morning, and Luke Brichetti presented on his research, and there was a shout out to you guys that you should receive the final report because you might find it interesting, because his research is focused on evaluating stream crossings, particularly in the Missisquoi Basin, but maybe also in the Lamoille and the Ausable. So just wanted to kind of like flag that for you, that it seems like the TAC wants to get that into your hands too, and I know it's separate from the NRGP, but than a road erosion inventory, but somewhat related. So just wanted to let you know.
Thanks. I'm gonna make a note to bug him.
Go ahead, Jim. Oh, was that not a question, Jim? Go ahead, Kent.
Sorry,
I believe in one of the
sorry, I
first
had it on mute.
slides.
Sorry. I just had two questions. One quickly, does this apply to paved roads as well that are private?
I believe so. Dean, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, because I mean there are quite a few. And then do you know how this overlaps with the 3-acre permit, in that the timeline for this, there's no regulation, I guess, at this point. There's no requirement, or there's no guidelines for how WISP money can be spent. And I know that there are and I know that there are I know that there are 3-acre properties that are basically very large forest lands with miles of dirt roads. So I just was wondering if you knew anything about the overlap with that permit and its requirements, which are coming up fairly quickly, I think.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that, Jim. So back in, I think, 2020, there was an initial listing of properties DEC thought was the starting point for who had to get a 3-acre permit. And I do know that there were some forested properties that were on that list. But what I've understood, though, is that those properties might not be on the 3-acre permit list any longer, but I'm not absolutely sure of that. but I think that is the case. I thought what you were asking, and maybe you were also getting at this, if we're talking about, let's just say, a rural subdivision, it could be, and it's residential, it's not just forest land. It could be on the 3-acre permit list, and that means that we wouldn't be addressing it through our work, because the people who have that road are going to have to comply with the 3-acre requirement. So it would not, the WISP funds can only go to non-regulatory settings, and that would be a regulatory setting. So we would be saying to someone, if they said, hey, can you come out to my property and show me how to do this road erosion inventory stuff? Because I'd like to try to, get funding eventually, if they're looking really far ahead. The first thing we would say is, well, wait a second, if you are in the list of properties that has to get a 3-acre permit, you're in the regulatory realm. So we're not dealing with your type of situation. But as far as the original question, it's been a bit of a challenge getting some information. I may have some records that I got back in December that'll confirm my suspicion that people like Vermont Land Trust or whoever had those properties in Montgomery or whatever that showed up as 3-acre properties, whether or not they are really going to be required to get the 3-acre developed land permit.
Kent, sorry, Heidi, Kent had his up first.
Okay, thank you. So I've got two questions. I may have, I probably missed this, but I was wondering if what are the geographical limitations to this study? And is this defined by Northwest Regional Planning's normal geographic area, or is this specific to the Missisquoi Basin?
It's actually the entire Lake Champlain Basin. So as part of this is a substantial study, and I'm sorry to preempt you, Cliff.
I was just gonna say that.
Okay, that's wonderful for us that serve in more than one basin. So that's really good news. The other thing is, I thought I saw in one of the slides a comment about prioritization of projects, and I was kind of curious what goes into that determination.
That is something that this study is. Part of the goal of the study is to determine how that prioritization happens. And there's the prioritization that already exists within the MRGP of whether a road meets standards or not, whether it partially meets standards or whether it doesn't meet standards set up permit. That's the existing prioritization for that, but we don't know now what it's going to look like, how the methodology for that prioritization.
Okay, and then as DEC has given us more prerequisites as we select through our projects to bring to the board or to the council, now we have to we have to figure out historical assessments and landowner cooperation. And I was just curious how those enter into the prioritization process, and if they're accounted for.
I mean, again, Dean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that that is part of the explicit aspects that's being added to this prioritization, and is part of what we did for the Lake Carmi project, is adding in the degree of landowner participation within the formula for prioritization that will give it a higher priority if there are people identified willing to work on this. And it's something that doesn't obviously exist with the MRGP because we're dealing with public land.
And then how about the historical assessments along these roads?
I don't know about that.
So yeah, the thing I would add, Kent, is that if there are projects that come out of an assessment, like basically someone does the road erosion inventory and they say this is an area that's ripe for water quality projects, and they're funded, the work would be funded by the clean water service provider using the state's clean water funds. That's a category of project that's going to have to first address the question, is it exempt? And I think maybe your question is like, where does a private road project fit in the funding formula section that says cultural resources? Is it exempt? Is it or conditionally exempt or not exempt? And I'm going to look that up because I can't tell you the answer off the top of my head. But those are the three options. It's either going to be that it's exempt, conditionally exempt, or not exempt. And I'm not sure how much text the existing funding policy has about it, but I may be able to find it fairly quickly while Heidi asks her question.
Well, Kent kind of touched on what I was curious about. I was thinking about the ongoing operations and maintenance, what kind of agreements you enter into with the landowners, and do they have to have a cooperative entity, a homeowners association, or someone that would be responsible for maintaining the infrastructure once it's created?
From my understanding, like that is the work that's the first phase of this, is determining what will be needed for all of that. And I apologize that I am not able to answer a lot of these questions, but I think this presentation is saying that we're starting this whole thing and we have to figure that out.
I can jump in to add, Heidi, that I think that there are going to be places where it's going to be a lot easier to think about doing a project. There are going to be places where it's easier to consider doing, and that might be a place where there's a homeowners association than in a place where there's no homeowners association or road association that we can interact with. So maybe technically both are going to have private roads and they're going to not meet water quality standards, and that we would be technically able to do a project. But for the reasons that you mentioned, we have to have, there has to be a scheme for managing it. And it could be that it's going to be a lot less attractive to do a project because who are we going to be signing the agreement with? If there's no entity there, they may be further down anybody's list of places to go to do a project because it would just be so complex to try to create the agreement. Because I can think of one situation in Lake Carmel. I mean, there's a property owner, and then there are people that have camps that are, leases, and they have rights of way, but it's not, there's no association, and the owner of the land underneath is basically like, the road is for them to take care of. It's like so we would just have to figure that out. That would be a very complex situation to try to use QUISP funds to improve, because like who's the agreement going to be with? Because the landowners right now has a very passive attitude. They say it's for the user of the road to take care of. So it'll probably
prioritization.
It'll be biasing who we ultimately do the project with. But as far as the prioritization, yeah, that could be, it could end up as being a fairly significant aspect of it, or a minor factor.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Cliff about this, or Dean?
I'm still trying to get the answer to Kent's question. And it just may be that it's going to take me too long, but if I had a minute more.
Well, I just want to say this is great. I'm glad there's some work being done with private roads. And I look forward to seeing what you guys learn. A good moment for folks to take a bathroom break or grab a snack while Dean looks this up, and then we'll dive into O&M. So if folks want to take a stretch.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah, I don't mean to pressure you, Dean, but
no
Another question I might have for Dean, not to interrupt him, is can QUISP funds be used to do the maintenance on private roads?
the quiz funds could be used to do a water quality project, but we can't use quiz funds to do basic maintenance of the road. And this is getting at maybe something that was embedded in Heidi's question. This, like Cliff said, this is an area that has, or this is a sector that is contributing a lot of phosphorus to the lake. So it's an area that we want to address, but it's going to be a challenge to address it. I was in a meeting and I know that there are QUISP funds that are being directed to a private road that provides access to Lake Iroquois in Richmond and Williston. And one of the things that has come out of that discussion is recognition of how challenging it's going to be to find the boundary between the ongoing maintenance of the water quality project and the maintenance that's really just required for the road. It's just not an easy thing to answer. And so hopefully it will become clearer as a result of this study, which is happening throughout the Lake Champlain Basin. And it's supposed to be done so that we are looking at roads, and I think it's spread out by sub-basin and so on. So it should give us a diversity of different settings, but hopefully it will help us understand, like, how will we determine where that boundary is? Because people that have a private road that's going to have a water quality project on it, or, you know, they're going to try to have as much done through the ongoing maintenance of that water quality project as they possibly can, right? Who wouldn't want that?
I just want to read, Lauren asked in the chat, she said, sorry, I'm sure I just missed this. Who's funding it again? And Cliff responded, the DEC is funding this project.
And I think the answer to Ken's question is that they're in the category of conditionally exempt. So there would have to be limits on ground disturbance and avoiding no direct or indirect impact. So I think you've got some familiarity with that. If you pass the conditions, then you don't have to have the additional review. So it's in that middle category, I think.
Well, I should think that it would have a big influence on landowner cooperation of whether they would want to get involved with the process if they thought they were going to have to undergo one of these historical assessments. I think it would be a big part of that discussion going in. We've had some real surprises, working along roads that have been in place for 150 years. And we're, one body says, no, we don't, there's no reason to spend the time and resources doing an assessment here and then have it turned over. So I think I think there's potential there for conflict is all.
Any other comments or questions on this topic before we move on?
I'm sorry, I'll just, if I can jump in, Lindsay, Ken, the funding policy is something that's supposed to be updated every year or every other year. And I know that they've been working on it. And this is something, this particular question that you're asking is a really good one that I'm going to make a note to contact Gianna about. And that is whether or not, as part of this update, are they thinking about whether or not private road work would be in the exempt category.
All right, well, wrapping up, thanks again, Cliff. Thanks to the NRPC for undertaking this study. And again, I look forward to seeing what you guys develop. The next agenda item is training on the O&M work. So Dean, you want to take that away?
It's actually something that Nora is going to
Pardon me.
address.
That's right.
I will just share my screen. I know some folks here today might have already seen this presentation, so thanks for sitting through it again, if that's the case. But I just wanted to provide a quick overview of operations and maintenance and the requirements for WISP-funded projects. But before I get started, just wanted to draw everyone's attention to the operations and maintenance manual that has just been released by DEC. Provides a lot of BMPs and a lot of O&M activities for different types of implemented BMPs. So it's a great resource to check out. I can drop the link to it in the chat after this presentation. So just a basic overview of what is required in terms of O&M and verification for implemented projects. So that initial verification is supposed to take place 1 year after implementation, and then following that every 3 years. And so DEC maintains a list of certified verifiers who go through a training and have access to a Survey 123 form to go visit certain sites and perform these verifications. And then in terms of O&M, O&M activities will be outlined in your O&M agreements, and so carried out according to those timelines, with expenditures being reported to the WISP. And 60 days before the date of automatic renewal, the organization is required to notify the landowner that automatic renewal is upcoming. And in terms of cancellation, if either party would like to cancel the agreement, that cancellation request is made in writing and goes into effect 180 days after the request is made. So in terms of what documentation is required, you're required to either have a signed site access license or site access easement. And the difference between those two agreements is that the easement runs with the parcel of land and doesn't need to be renegotiated in the case of sale or transfer of ownership, but the license would. And easements are only required for over $200,000 in state funding for implementation. Just the implementation phase, I believe we clarified last week. And there was a new update to these templates that are on DEC's website in October, so it's important to make sure that you're using the most recent template. And the main changes between what was in place before is that it now includes a plain language cover letter for the landowner to understand the meaning of the agreement and what the operations and maintenance plan is. And this agreement gets signed by the WISP, the landowner, and the landowner liaison, which is typically the implementing organization, but can be any designated liaison depending on relationships with the landowner or just the individual situation. I guess I just already went over that, but the initial agreement term is supposed to be the same as design life, and then you would determine in the agreement itself what the automatic renewal terms thereafter are. And it also creates a procedure for reporting conveyance of ownership of a piece of land with a project implemented, as well as the automatic renewal and determination process, as I mentioned before. So the implementing organization is responsible for, as I mentioned, the site access and easement agreements, including confirming the landowner liaison status, outlining maintenance activities, including frequency and special equipment, occasionally reminding landowners of agreement terms, and, as I mentioned, notifying the WISP in case of ownership conveyance. as well as performing maintenance activities yourself or ensuring that they're completed if contracted out, and then reporting the results and the expenditures to the WISP. And the WISP is then responsible for reporting maintenance and verification to DEC using their reporting template. So the main way that these verifications are reported to DEC is through Survey 123. So verifiers go to the site, and currently there's only two verification checklists online, which are for stormwater, BMPs, and riparian buffer plantings. So verifiers visit the site to confirm that the project is functioning and that maintenance activities are being performed as intended, and these verifications are not regulatory inspections. And then the WISP submits the annual verification and maintenance reporting spreadsheet to DEC. And so we at NRPC have created an internal system for tracking these requirements. So there's one form for reporting individual O&M expenditures so that we can track how much has been spent on a given O&M agreement. There's another form to just confirm that landowners have been notified of automatic renewal at least 60 days in advance of the automatic renewal taking place. And then the third is to provide the contact information of a new landowner in case land is sold or transferred. So that's sort of a general overview. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Yes, Lauren.
Nora, great presentation again. It actually helps to hear it several times, so I appreciate that. I think one of my questions is probably for Dean. I know at one point we had talked about adopting old projects. I'm thinking specifically for like old tree plantings that were DEC funded but weren't WISP funded, that maybe are in various levels of stages away from 1 to 3 years from implementation. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that in particular.
Yeah, we still have the it's not really a mandate, but we have the instructions that clean water service providers can achieve some of their targets by adopting projects. It's something that's come off the front of the front burner and moved to a back one, but it is still a possibility. There are limits on how much of the target can be achieved using adopted projects, and there are some peculiarities about where the funding for those projects came from. But yeah, we haven't come back to that issue for a while, but it's still very much a real thing.
Okay, yeah, I guess I don't have capacity right now either, but at some point would love to talk about if it's possible to get some O&M funds for some of our older for some of our DEC funded tree planting projects over the past couple of years.
We can talk about it one-on-one, and it may also be before too long something to come back to the WISP as a whole. I did also just wanted to mention, I don't know if you saw it, Lindsay, but there was a question from Alaire.
Yeah.
And I can take a stab at that and then let Nora fill in, or maybe Nora had a reaction, but the question about conservation easements, did you want to take a stab at that or prefer me to?
I feel like you might know more, but I feel like based on our discussion before, probably, well, yeah, you should probably answer that.
Yeah. So I think the answer, Alaire, is going to probably be no, because the one of the parties that holds the easement must be the WISP, and there's really no reason to add the WISP as a co-holder of the easement of a broader conservation easement. So I just don't see the conservation easement as being a vehicle, and I think DEC would probably say, no, why would you ever do that? And it's probably the case that we wouldn't ever see a case where the clean water service provider is added. I mean, yeah, I think the answer is no.
I guess the reason I was asking is this came up for me recently on a project in the Missisquoi Basin where VLT has a river corridor easement that specifically says you can get in there and there's a buffer and restoration and access is all kind of like a right of VLT and its partners in that easement. And just like the landowners, this was the landowners who had not like put the easement on the land, they had purchased it later. And it was just a really like a bunch of awkward conversations. And I just want to like put that out there. This like reality of how this is happening because there's a WISP funded tree planting that's happening on the site and a WISP funded berm removal and the easement. And so like going back to them and having them sign a bunch of agreements that like literally all are like the same because it's all about stuff that's taking place in the same location, that the easement, the conservation easement guarantees that right to access for all of that is like, it really like put a bad taste in the landowner's mouth. And just want to like be aware that like as we keep adding these things, like there's places where that is going to happen more and more. And I think it really does kind of degrade our ability to do projects. Because if we could just say like, we have this conservation easement, it lets us do all these things and then like use that to submit to the WISP, it would be way better. I mean, most conservation easements don't actually allow for that kind of thing, but like this one as a river corridor easement does. DEC is a co-holder of that easement. So just wanting to name that, there's a lot of risk of like overdoing stuff that like could even make a landowner say they don't want to do a project because they're so annoyed by all of that stuff. So
yeah, I see Chris Rottler's hand is up, and so he's going to have a perspective. But you saying that the DEC is a co-holder of this easement may be like the one thing that could make the situation different and maybe lead me to a different answer. But I'm going to let Chris Rottler offer some thoughts because I think he does want to.
Oh, there, I'm happy. Hi, everybody. Thanks for letting me be an eavesdropper here and just wanting to be a cheerleader in the background, but for your work. No particular reason why I'm here, but hearing this question, I'm happy to start a conversation with our O&M team, Rachel Wood and Gianna, and also bring it to legal. I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Happy to facilitate that and see what we can't get back for an answer. So if you send me a detailed email, you can copy Dean or whatever, or, happy to just help out. Just let me know. All right.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I thought I saw another hand, but no, it doesn't seem that way, Lindsay. There have been some arrivals. I believe Ted is here now.
Hello? Excuse me, I'm gonna keep the camera off while I stuff my face with lunch.
So I know Ted was at the dentist, so obviously no Novocaine.
No Novocaine, clean bill of health, and I'm really hungry.
Great. Yeah, and Karen joined us as well. Hi, Karen.
Hi, everyone.
Are there any other questions about O&M? Thanks, Nora, for that presentation and for linking the resources in the chat.
I was just going to add or emphasize something that Nora said, which is this, even though we do a lot of accounting across the life of a project, this $200,000 threshold is for the implementation phase only. That has been clarified, and we did have several emails going back and forth. It is $200,000 of state funds. It's not the clearest wording, in my opinion, about what state funds would be considered, but WISP funds would be included. I can tell you that for sure. And funds from other reporting agencies, I can tell you would be included for sure. Whether or not there might be some other state funds that could be brought to a project that wouldn't be included, I can't say for sure, but the first two categories are going to take up the majority of our work anyway.
Not to play the devil's advocate, but is it your understanding that if a project was awarded over $200,000, then they could cancel the agreement at some point in the future after the project's been built. And I mean, I think Nora referred to a document or something. There might be, fine print in there about what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, what the state's response would be. But it did sort of sound like on the face value that 120 days after you could just walk away from it and do nothing. And I just find that hard to believe.
I would be happy to offer some thoughts on that. Chris may also have some opinions. I think this is maybe leading us towards a discussion of some of the bigger questions about the system that has been created to address access, because you're right, this is a site access agreement or a license or an easement, and although it's called an easement and it has a bit more heft than the license, it's still something that's pretty tenuous in my estimation. So it's something that experience may show, if there were to be some cases where things went bad and the property owner canceled it, the clean water service provider from that point on may become, and the BWIC may become very, very shy about funding projects that rely on even an easement, because the easement it's not like the easement that Alaire just described. But I don't know if Karen or Chris had any additional thoughts.
I'm happy to provide an opinion, but I just want to make sure I understood the concern about the document or the process. Would it be possible to restate it?
Well, Chris, I'm just asking if a landowner, whoever it is awarded, if a project is awarded $200,000 on his land, he can cancel that easement after it's built, 120 days after it's completed, verified, certified as complete. He, under the language that Nora referred to, he or she, and I'm saying I don't think what I'm saying is I don't think it's likely probably that landowner would, because he was all apparently in support of the project from the beginning. But a future landowner, a subsequent landowner, might change their mind and say, well, I don't really like this anymore, and he could potentially cancel it, or that would be some kind of battle between him and the WISP.
Yeah, I mean, all of this is about balancing risk, and you could put in more restrictive language, but then you'd have to convince the landowner at the front end to sign it. So you could put in a year, or you could put in 2 years. But then if the landowner said no, then you wouldn't get any project in there. So, I understood from legal. I think legal was the one who put this in there. It's just, it's not. I don't know what the historical or typical clauses are, but this seems like a balancing act kind of provision to entice people to sign on to the program, but to give them, a reasonable exit. And I think the 6-month period, the 120 days, is meant to provide a buffer amount of time for whoever the implementer is and the QuIS to kind of work with that in order to keep them in the system. So yeah, I would just say it's a balancing act, and hopefully this is a really rare thing, because by the time you get to this point, most people are raising their hands to do the project. I think that's the logic behind that.
I don't know if Karen was going to say something, or was it just that? Okay. Yeah, something I would add, Jim, is that I understand your concern. The idea of a cancelable easement is concerning. This Basin Council has approved a project that has a value of roughly $800,000 at its implementation phase. There's reason to be less concerned because it's a municipally owned piece of land. But I think I would be a little more hesitant if that $800,000 project was on private land, because it is something where there's a higher degree of risk than, and like Chris said, it's about balancing risk. What I would say is that, these are the kinds of factors that have had the clean water service provider suggesting since the beginning that some kind of compensation to the landowner for hosting a project could change the dynamic substantially, even because if the property owner is receiving such a fee, it becomes more of a business relationship, and they might be willing to walk into an agreement or sign an agreement if they know that they're getting a paycheck for hosting it. And that, if they were to say no more access, well, there's also saying no more compensation. But that's not part of the current system. Maybe it would be in the future.
Any closing questions or comments on the O&M topic? Hearing none. The next agenda item is project sharing. Dean, I don't know if anyone had.
No one had contacted me to say they were. I just and if there are no comments or sharing that people want to do, I just wanted to share this screen. I apologize, this is kind of crowded, and I might have flashed this, and I see Lauren's hand is up, so maybe she's actually gonna take advantage of this, and I can stop.
Ooh, sorry, this is my first time using these headphones, and that just got really weird in here. I'm actually wondering if you can leave that slide up, and I can maybe just like do some high level chat about all the ones we're working on if folks care to hear that. I don't have slides or more interesting things than that. All right, so this top one, right? Riparian buffer planting and floodplain restoration project development. Oh, that's closed. Sorry, the riparian planting scoping in the Missisquoi Bay Basin off 11431. We're getting close to wrapping that up. We've had, we sent out some letters to landowners of sites that have been identified through various means to try to get some trees planted. And I've had, honestly, like I think 2 or 3 people say that they would be interested in even talking to us, which is more than any other set of letters I've ever sent out for project development. So that's going well. We have had success in a couple other rounds of looking at tree plantings through this as well. But for the latest round, that has actually been going really well. Trout Brook Reservoir dam removal final design. We did an amendment with Dean to put some of the bid phase services into that, the final design contract, and we're hoping to put that out to bid soon. Almost all of the permit applications have gone in or are going in like literally today. So that is still moving forward. Marsh Brook floodplain restoration. This is for a couple of sites in the state park and above, and we're working with Fitzgerald Environmental on cleaning or on clarifying a couple of things in an alternatives analysis, and then hope to bring some options to regulators and landowners. But that is looking good. The branch, not a lot to talk about. Sandy Bay Tributary Wood Addition. We have selected a engineer to do that work. And that is, again, going to be Fitzgerald Environmental Associates. Trout Brook Reservoir Dam removal implementation. Dean and I are working through some processes before that gets contracted. So I still don't have, we don't have a contract for that, but we're figuring it out. Blackwood's common lot shoreline bioengineering. We're actively in a few emails right now trying to figure out exactly what is required for that final design. That was one of the projects that we had talked about, well, what level of final design is really needed for a project this simple. And so we're trying to still work through identifying exactly that information before we hire anybody to do that work. Montgomery Flood Resilience Project Development. Slow rolling start on that one, but we'll pick it up soon. And then the last two ones are the tree plantings. Those are actually looking really cool, and we went out to those sites last week to get our eyes on those areas without snow, and we went out to the one at Giddings with Red Start, who's going to do part of the planting with us. And we're making some really fun plans for getting that done in the next couple of weeks. If anybody wants to come plant trees, we actually have a sign up sheet, so I'm going to toss that into the chat too. But we have, I think, 5 or 6 days of tree planting in April. If you guys want to get out of the office, because I think we're all losing our minds a little bit here and it feels good to plant trees. So I'll toss that into the chat too. That's where we're at with all those.
I just wanted to state the obvious, and that as you can see, there are a lot of projects that are being done by the Conservation District. And it's great that they are able to do that work, because without partner organizations being involved, then we wouldn't be going anywhere. So my hat is off to you, as well as the other organizations that are doing these projects. Is there anybody else that wanted to say anything about any of the items on the list? I can touch base on one, although only in a very limited way. There is a funded project to use the FFI tool. That was something that the Regional Planning Commission had applied for. And then of the award, it split it into 2 pieces, some of which that the Regional Planning Commission was going to use and some of which the MRBA was going to use. And that's work that was being done some by Maddie when she was still with the Regional Planning Commission. But there has not been a lot of progress on it, although I also understood that one of the reasons why was that we've been waiting for some developments or enhancements in the FFI tool, which people thought it made sense to hold off on doing and wait until the FFI tool enhancements were here.
I can speak to the MRBA's progress with that. We have been using the FFI tool. We figured out sort of a clumsy way to utilize it, and it takes a lot of effort. And thanks to folks at Franklin County Conservation District for helping us sort of figure out the method they used, and then we were able to adapt it for us. We're at the phase of wanting to do some on ground truthing, so we'll be doing some of that now that the snow is starting to melt out. And be pushing that forward, and then hope to come up with some probable sites, a list of probable sites sometime by the end of summer. As for our other projects, I can just touch on those. The Trout River implementation project, stream restoration, I am not able to get done this year. I have talked informally with Dean about that. I really hoped to be able to pull it off this summer, but have too many other projects going on. Apologies, Heidi. Heidi asked what FFI is. It's a functioning floodplain initiative tool. It's a modeling tool that helps identify priority areas and projects. The North Troy project development, I just need to finalize and close out. That project continues. There's still great energy in North Troy. I had a site visit that sort of came out of some of this work yesterday. But this phase of the project development I need to close out. So apologies to Dean for not getting that to you yet. And then Sleeper Dam project development is a beast that continues to be developing. And I've chatted with Dean and Cliff about that ongoing project. as well. We do still hope to get that out. We are getting permits signed. Well, we're hoping to get permits signed by the town tomorrow. Yeah, so hopefully that one moves forward this summer.
If that covered it, if no one else had anything to say, Alaire.
This is an okay place to just like ask, since we have all these awesome projects up, just to ask some questions about like some trends. I'm just curious because of some experiences I'm having in other watersheds, just about how things are going, like with permitting and that kind of thing. Or is that?
I think it's fine with me, Dean. I think we don't have anything. Well, you have some updates and announcements that you need to cover, but we do have a few extra minutes here, right?
Yes, yes, we are awaiting the arrival of Catherine. So yes, there's time.
Okay. I don't know. I would just love to hear from you all who are just like managing these lists of projects around like wetlands and mostly wetlands and historic preservation interaction, but specifically around wetlands, and how are you finding that it's smooth to move through like particularly allowed use kind of confirmation with the wetlands program? I've run into some, it just seems like it's that like that process has changed a little bit on their side, and I'm just curious if you guys are experiencing that too. It's changing in terms of getting more complicated for me.
I guess I can speak from experience, Alaire. We have a project in the Willoughby area, and it is adjacent to some wetlands. But the key is to get Shannon Morrison out there early and often. And
Yeah.
she helped confirm some of the delineations that Fitzgerald Environmental did. And having both the contractor and Shannon out, it's made that process really smooth. So that's about the only one I can speak for.
Thank you.
Alaire, I'm sorry, I was a little distracted. You're looking for thoughts on how wetlands is going?
Yeah, it feels like it's the first few projects that I worked on, it was like, okay, this is a restoration project. It's got DEC funding. It's an allowed use. It's like, yes, go for it. Awesome. And now there's just, it feels like there's two different projects, two different staff who I've, worked with in the past as well. It's like just a lot more scrutiny that feels it's honestly holding things up. And it doesn't totally make sense to me. So I'm just curious if like you've found that the allowed use piece is smooth, or like it requires a lot more.
I guess the experience we've had so far for the dam removal has been that they actually are requiring us to do an individual permit. So I think at one point we thought it might be an allowed use early on in the project, and that is no longer the case. It's happened for a couple of different permits though, so I think, I don't know if that's exclusive to wetland, but
okay. No, that tracks with, yeah.
Yeah, I think
like
maybe something's changed.
It's really challenging. Yeah.
You also asked about cultural resources, I think, Alaire.
Yeah, and that's something that it just is, it doesn't feel like there's a change there. There's just definitely, I think to parallel what Ted said about wetlands, it's like early, get the cultural resources folks out there early. And that's just a completely different type of like thinking and work, and it's like not something that I'm as familiar with. So just kind of leaving that to them and really understanding that it may be like up to a year, depending on the time of year that you need to engage, that you're able to get required assessments done and things like that can really delay things.
Yeah, before Karen goes in, and I don't know if you're going to continue on cultural resources, but I was going to say that we we learned a bit of good news for a project in the Lamoille Basin. It was a project funded by the Basin Council. Their design work was done, and the expectation of the sponsor, the town of Fairfax, was that cultural resources wouldn't be an issue, and then they all of a sudden became an issue. But we had a site visit, and the results of that site visit were they determined that they were not going to ask for more review. So it was positive news, a little bit unexpected, and maybe it's a sign. I'm not sure. I know that other WISP were involved with had projects that we're going to get individual site visits, and I haven't followed up to find out whether or not they resulted in the same determination. But yes, we are hearing that this can be an issue. And you're right, starting early is definitely a help. Karen?
I do have a comment on the cultural resources, if that.
Yeah,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
Karen.
Yeah.
I'll just say one thing I learned the hard way recently was I got my ARA and my phase 1 from my consultant, and I thought that was done, but they hadn't run it past SHPO yet, and things changed. And so I think just knowing, like, oh, you might hear one thing from your consultant, but if the whole process hasn't gone through with SHPO, things are still subject to change. I think there was a little bit of misunderstanding too around we have to do a historical resources documentation package for the dam removal, and I think I had probably done a bad job of communicating to the engineers that meant additional work still needed to happen, and that information needs to be included in bid docs for our earthwork contractor. So there was a lot of nuance there on like that particular project that maybe isn't applicable to some of the stuff that you're running into, but I definitely have some lessons learned if anybody ever wants to talk one-on-one about that process.
So I guess I was just going to add on maybe to Alaire's comments just about changes or difficulties. So overall, right, there's an issue because things can change and you guys don't get the heads up except through, the discussions like this. And so I am all ears to try to figure out how we, I guess, what we might want to do to document or ensure that one group knows. And so you can go to them for, well, what's the updates now on this or that? Specifically the issue was the dam removal where you're leaving a lot of sediment. I sort of got, understood what was going on and so wanted more of an explanation. And I think realized it's very new. The Rivers program is handling it very differently now than they used to. I guess the Wayne Scott Dam was a demonstration project that helped them understand what they needed to do to permit that. But it means then that, anybody removing a dam may need to talk to Rivers program and wetlands about any concerns or changes in how they're reviewing these projects, early on. Yeah, and so I wonder if that's, Alaire, that's one of the reasons why that, were you keeping a lot of sediment?
Yeah, one of the projects was, it was a very small, like tiny little dam. It's more associated with a culvert replacement, but there was a man-made impoundment nearby. And yeah, like material that had built up behind it was considered to be a wetland. And there was some questions around that and the impacts of that.
Were you removing all the sediment or just some of it?
We were proposing to remove some of it as like to create a little flood bench.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know. I don't know if that was part of it, but I know that within the last year, they've been doing a lot of thinking and revising how they do things, but it doesn't necessarily get to you in a way that is like obvious. And I've talked to another partner about just how do you keep up with everything that's changing, and because we're not doing it well.
It's really hard. We had another project that was happily funded by the Winooski Quisp that then was pulled. The funding was pulled because of a change in the FFI, because it was on an unmapped stream, and and the change had happened like in the interim period between when we applied and got funded, and then we're trying to like move forward with it. And so then I'm back applying for money from, enhancement funding. So just like really, really frustrating. And I guess I would just say, from my perspective, like DEC and the state of Vermont is like wanting us to do these projects, right? Has money. DEC also includes the wetlands program and the rivers program. Like, I want like all of like the state folks to be like, are we doing this or not? Like, are we going to support this process or not? And other than leaving it to all of us to try to figure out what each of those departments is trying to figure out, and changes and tracking that and dealing with individuals and how things are changing over time. It's like, if we're going to support this work and like want to do this work, like let's all just like agree to do that. And like, I just hope I kind of would love like DEC to be like, we've figured out how we're going to like promote this, and just do everything they can to support it. I mean, like, right, we got a climate crisis, we've got all these issues, just do stuff rather than holding up little and good projects for a long time. So that would be my request. And it's like, it sounds like folks are experiencing some similar things. Obviously every project is different, but yeah, I don't know if there's like a space for like more of a convening of the folks who are like leading the wetlands program, like how like having bigger conversations versus like getting into the weeds on smaller ones that can then just like hold up like VLT or MRBI or somebody for, I mean, I don't know. We don't have funding. Like, I don't write that into my grants, like time to deal with like weird stuff with DEC. I could, I mean, I guess I could, but like, I don't want
I think it should be an item.
No, I don't want it to be. I mean, I just want it to work, I think we all do. And I think DEC, like, probably most people who are involved with this do. And let's just like identify where there's those sticking points and try to smooth them out.
Yeah. So I do know, like, for example, we're going to be meeting with rivers, lakes, and wetlands and my program. And we do it every once in a while just to sort of make sure we're on the same, we understand how we're going to be reviewing projects and accepting them. And so I could certainly bring that up. I think we try to meet quarterly, but it's now every other or twice a year. So we can certainly, it might be that the basin planners, when talking with the books, especially because we do have this great collection of people who are doing projects, and understand where we might need to have a discussion. And so I can certainly, we're writing the agenda up now, and so I'll add that to the agenda for discussion. But I also think, that there are, you've got the, like, VNRC are they able to sort of identify where there are issues and then make sure that there's a topic in their meeting? So I think we need to ensure there's more conversation, and that when the decisions are made, that decision then goes somewhere. So, and the other thing I think with Dean, I would say that, the clean water service providers, you meet, periodically, once a month on Fridays. And maybe you guys bring up again sort of issues around that are going to slow projects down, and have us all decide, well, how are we going to manage that? How are we going to facilitate the conversation, the discussion, and then also how and where are we going to put this information so it as soon as we've made the decision. And at least then you all can know, if you have a question about something, you can go to the QUISPs. Or the QUISP, when they're reviewing projects, can look and go, oh gosh, yeah, this was funded this time, and we know this decision was made this time, so things might change. And I'm sorry, Dean, I'm sort of throwing a process at you that I've thought about, and it's just throwing spaghetti on the wall, trying to figure it out. Because at this point, I try very hard. Because I know I know most of the changes. I didn't know the rivers program change with leaving sediment, and so I stumbled into that and was very sorry that clogged up. No pun intended. The process, but There are other situations where I do know, and I try to provide that information to you all, but it's like here and there. And it might be to one person in a watershed group, and then their staff changes. So I understand it's a problem, an issue. I see the frustration. I'm frustrated, and it shouldn't be that way. We should figure out how to make it work easier. And some things we can't do. Like I can't tell Watershed Management Division how to issue permits, but I can at least understand how they do it. And we can find a way to at least let people know when something's going to take more time, how it might be approached so that you can get the decision that makes the most sense. Whatever. All right, that's my spiel for the meeting. But don't blame me. No, can I just tell you this, that when we first started this whole process and standing up the QUISP, I'm like, oh my God, we are the bullet. We are the target. If any good thing goes wrong, it's easy to look to us, and we could, of course, always do something better. But I'm on your side, guys, really.
Lauren, I acknowledge your hand up. I just want to make note of the time. So I want to wrap this up. We did have a 12th item on the agenda before Catherine takes over, and she has joined us. So Lauren, do you have a brief statement?
I guess I just see one point where this information could be easily shared, but maybe isn't, is in when we're doing project screening forms, it feels like this is a good place where some of the information, when changes have happened, that would be useful as a, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Lauren. Dean, do you want to do your updates and announcements, or do we want to roll into Catherine? And
Well, I will follow up with you, Lauren, just get an understanding of what changes to the screening form might be requested of DEC. So that's something. And I think we should just get things rolling for Catherine if you're ready, and we'll squeeze in the updates after. And I also know that you have to leave early, so maybe putting Kent on notice that as of 12:45, he will be running the show.
yeah, he's aware.
Okay, he's aware. Okay, excellent. Yeah, so maybe I can just make an introduction of Catherine by saying that some of you have heard of the WISPr program, but if you haven't, it's something that allows municipalities to use the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund in a special way. And basically it allows them to sponsor natural resource projects that improve water quality as part of the package, and it doesn't cost them any more money. In fact, it saves them a little bit of money. The Regional Planning Commission, Northwest Regional Planning Commission, is trying to build awareness of this. We were doing this a couple of years ago, and it seems like this is a body that it would be good to have aware of the WISPr program, particularly on the side of where could natural resource projects come from, because the WISPr program lends itself to certain types of projects, maybe expensive ones, and those that don't have a strong phosphorus performance. So it just seemed like there's some benefit from having Catherine come and speak. Catherine coordinates the program. She's done it for, I think, at least a couple of years. And I know she's presented to some of us here as part of the partners group, but she has not made a presentation to the Basin Council. So I guess I would say, Catherine, without further ado, you can take it from here, and you should be able to share those slides, or I could share them if you would prefer.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Yeah, let me just get my screen ready to share here. Okay, is everyone seeing that all right? Okay. All right. Yeah, thanks, Dean, for that introduction. Yeah, I think basically what I'm planning to go on into more detail in this presentation is just talking a bit about how the program works, how the financing works, and types of projects that are eligible, and just sort of what the timeline looks like for that. I know some of you have definitely heard this spiel before. But yeah, just Dean thought it would be good to give a refresher to some of you or those of you that haven't heard it. And yeah, feel free to stop me if you have any questions, but yeah, also happy to take any questions at the end. And I don't think I can see the chat, so if anyone wants to call those out, that'd be great. So yeah, so WISPr, as you can see here, stands for the Water Infrastructure Sponsorship Program. And this program is really meant to incentivize the development of natural resource infrastructure that supports water quality through the implementation of natural resource projects. And the program is made possible by Act 185, which describes the sponsorship relationship here that allows municipalities with CWSRF loans for water quality, water pollution and abatement facility projects to sponsor natural resource projects for the purpose of water quality improvement. So as I mentioned previously, WISPr projects are natural resource projects, which means they must protect, conserve, or restore natural resources, including the acquisition of easements and land for the purposes of providing water quality benefits. And this list here reflects the different types of natural resource projects that are categorically eligible. That includes dam removal, floodplain or stream restoration, land conservation, river corridor and wetland easements, riparian buffer plantings, wetland restoration, and lake shoreline restoration or erosion repair. So when determining which types of projects are eligible for WISPr, there's sort of two parts of this. The first is that categorical eligibility, and the second is that a project must provide a water quality benefit in one of two ways. The first is by restoring a natural resource, and the second is by protecting a natural resource now and in perpetuity. So the way that this works in terms of the financing is that a municipality must hold a Clean Water State Revolving Fund loan. That could be for something like a treatment works facility or stormwater management. And the loan functions like any other loan where the principal covers the project and the municipality is responsible for paying back the associated interest along with the principal of that loan. So with WISPr, we are able to redirect the administrative rate to cover the cost of a natural resource project by reducing the administrative rate that's due back to the state and putting that towards a natural resource project. So this graph here explains how we're able to do this, reflecting the lifetime costs of two $1 million CWSRF loans. The first one on the left is a regular CWSRF loan where there's no WISPr project being sponsored. And the standard admin rate for this is 2%, which gives an overall lifetime cost of that loan of $1,339,500. And on the right is a CWSRF loan that includes a WISPr natural resource project. So in both scenarios, the base principal CWSRF loan is $1 million. But you can see that on the right, we also have a WISPr natural resource project in light blue. And WISPr can sponsor projects up to 10% of the cost of that base loan. So in this case, that could be up to $100,000 for a $1 million CWSRF loan. So the WISPr project is then added to the principal of the SRF loan, giving the total principal up to 1.1 million. So then we get to the admin rate reduction. So what happens next is that the DEC will decrease the admin rate until the total costs over the life of the loans is equal to what it would have been if there was no WISPr project involved. And so that's effectively reducing the costs associated with the admin rate by the cost of the WISPr project. So also, in order to provide an additional incentive to municipalities for sponsoring WISPr projects, the department will reduce the admin rate by another 0.1%, making the overall cost of the sponsoring CWSRF actually cheaper than one that is not sponsoring a WISPr project. So in this example here, We would first reduce it by 1.3%. That would equal out the two scenarios, and then provide an additional 0.1% reduction, which would bring our admin rate to 1.2%, which would lead to an overall lifetime savings for this loan of $22,129. So by looking at these graphs, we can see that WISPr essentially allows us to get two projects for less than the price of one. But it's also important to note that while I've been mentioning a single WISPr project, it's also possible for a single CWSRF loan to sponsor multiple natural resource projects, so long as they fall within that 10% range. So in terms of who can implement these WISPr projects, there are two main options. The first is that the same municipality that is sponsoring the natural resource project with their loan can choose to implement their own project. So say a project has a CWSRF loan for a new treatment works facility, and they also are aware of a floodplain restoration they want to do in their town, they can choose to take on the implementation of that as well. The second option, and one that's most common, is that a WISPr project is being implemented by some party other than the sponsoring municipality. So this could be a nonprofit, RPC, conservation district, watershed group, or even another municipality. So it's also important to note that WISPr projects aren't geographically limited within the state of Vermont. So that means that a sponsoring municipality can support natural resource projects in any neighboring town. It could be in their watershed or really anywhere else in the state. Just depends on their own preference for what they're willing to support. In terms of who can sponsor a natural resource project, so this is municipalities, and they must have a loan funded through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And the way that the best way that we recommend in finding municipalities that could be good eligible WISPr sponsors is by using the potential WISPr sponsors list that's posted at the bottom of the website link that I just sent before I started presenting. And so that's updated about every 6 months. So I'm working on an update to that now, and that includes a few different pages that I will go over. So it contains two different pages. The first is one that goes over step 3 CWSRF loans. So it's important to note that only step 3 construction loans are eligible to be WISPr sponsors. So step 2 or step 1 planning or design loans are not eligible for to sponsor WISPr projects. And this shows towns with active construction loans and provides information on the cost of the loans and timing. So like when the loan is projected to go into repayment, really. The other page in this Excel sheet reflects filtered IUPs from the past 5 to 6 years. So IUP stands for the intended use plan and is the state's way of communicating how the CWSRF will be used for each fiscal year. Part of this is listing projects that are eligible to receive funding. And this list here in the Excel document is edited for those that are not eligible to sponsor WISPr project. And you'll notice that there's some different color shading and information here. Those projects that have project numbers, are those that are in the planning or design phase. So that's a good sign that they're moving forward and being funded by the CWSRF. Those gray highlighted ones are projects that are either low cost or are village wastewater projects, which typically have other grants, so are less likely to come to the CWS for their step 3 loan, which is another important piece to know about these ones listed on the IUP versus ones that have current construction loans. Just because they're listed on the IUP doesn't mean they're guaranteed to come to the CWSRF for their step 3. So the shading is sort of indicating the likelihood or success of them doing that. And so towns in blue are those with a median household income below the state average. These are eligible for many other grants, and therefore might be less likely to come to the CWSRF for their full cost of their construction project. But the biggest takeaway here is that the projects listed in white are those that are most likely to be eligible for WISPr. That doesn't mean the other ones aren't, but it just means they have a few more barriers. So something that's really important to think about throughout the WISPr process is making sure that we're lining up the timing of sponsoring loans and the sponsoring project and the WISPr project. And so the specifics of this timeline can be quite variable depending on the projects, but I hope this will just give a general idea. So the first step is that a CWSRF loan for the treatment works facility is listed on a project priority list. That's as part of the IUPs that I mentioned previously. As part, so after this, there will be a bond vote to approve the project costs, and then that sponsoring project can move forward through final design and construction. So during this project, during this part of the process, there's likely to be some kind of project development for the natural resource project. It's then at some point during construction of the sponsoring CWSRF project or near the end that a WISPr application can be submitted. So once construction is completed and the final cost of the sponsoring loan is known, a WISPr application can be amended, or sorry, WISPr application and a WISPr application has been received, then that loan can be amended to include the cost of the WISPr project. So once that loan is amended, we can proceed with the implementation of the natural resource project. And finally, those costs will be incorporated into the amortization schedule of the loan as it goes into repayment. So finally, the last slide here I have is really why implement a WISPr project. I think Dean touched on this, really all the main points that I have, which are one is that it's not focused on phosphorus credits or phosphorus reduction, so phosphorus credits don't need to be tracked. And this makes the program specifically well suited for those more expensive water quality projects that might have lower P reduction benefits. And O&M can also be adopted by WISPs, and so if there are any credits available through O&M, WISPs might be able to adopt those. And yeah, that's all I have. One thing that I meant to touch on one of the earlier slides was just sort of about the WISPr project development and matchmaking. Matchmaking, like, is what we call the pairing of the municipal project with the water natural resource project. And I think what we found to be most successful is really honing in on a potential sponsor and really getting their support to be a part of the program. And from there, sort of developing the natural resource projects and either, developing new ones or coming to them with ones that you are already aware of and think they might be willing to support. It's just a bit more difficult to do it in the reverse of like having a natural resource project and then trying to find the right sponsor. And like I said, it's not geographically limited, but some municipalities are more finicky than others, I guess, in terms of whether or not they want the project to be in their own community or not. So that's a consideration to make. Yeah, other than that, I'd be happy to take any questions. Yeah, I see one hand up.
Yeah, hi, I'm Heidi with the Village of Swanton, and I wanted to ask you to please go a little more into depth about the qualifications for applying to say you're protecting a natural resource. Some things we do to protect a natural resource, such as stormwater projects or things like that, don't necessarily meet your criteria. So could you just speak to that a little further? What qualifies and what would not be eligible, please?
Yeah, I think one key thing that we have in our policy that I haven't gone through here is really with a focus of obviously addressing natural resources, but also always having this eye towards natural resource restoration and using some sort of bioengineering practices to do so. And so we do have written into our policy that any sort of hard infrastructure sort of automatically disqualifies a project from this natural resource definition. So something like riprap, for example, is something we might not want to support, but we would support, you know, a more bioengineering approach to a bank stabilization, for example.
If I can just jump in, just building on what you said, I was understanding that there may be more explicit allowance for stormwater projects if they are green infrastructure. Is that accurate? And then like how can a determination be made at the earliest possible point that a design that a community might have, let's just say in Swanton Village, they've got a stormwater problem and they want to fix it. How quickly could they get a determination, and who would get that determination that yes, this is going to meet our definition of green? Is it just by filing the application?
It's a good question. Yeah. So, yeah, green stormwater infrastructure, like there are certain parts of green, like certain green stormwater infrastructure practices that WISPr might be able to support and certain ones that we might not be. But that determination is made by our watershed planners. And we can do like preliminary eligibility determinations before we get that's done in part by the watershed planners, but in part by the Rivers program as well. So watershed planners are involved in the determination of whether or not it's considered a natural resource project. And the Rivers program more so just verifying that the project will have a water quality benefit.
So Karen, who was talking earlier about the things that she can do for clean water projects, would be playing a very big role in this.
Yes.
And I guess, Karen, you may be doing other things, but because I know you have another meeting coming up, I'm just kind of curious about whether or not having a particular problem identified in the tactical basin plan would have any impact on whether or not it might be considered green stormwater infrastructure or not.
Yeah, I'll just say before Karen jumps in, I know I haven't worked with Karen a lot on WISPr yet in her basin, so this would be sort of like a new thing for us to explore, I guess. But I do think that one big part of determining eligibility for the CWSRF and for like this is natural resource projects, which falls under the bigger umbrella of non-point source projects within the CWSRF eligibility, which I know we've talked about, Dean. But an important piece for the eligibility of that is having it be listed in having projects listed in basin plans. So I think, you know, that can only help. But curious your thoughts, Karen.
So I think I see the basin planning process as a way to start thinking about what projects and where. So my thought had been actually with Catherine is that we could have a meeting to really to think about, to discuss with partners. All right, these are the towns that are going to be, you know, they'll be having large projects coming through perhaps. Can we think of any projects that could fit those so that somebody can then go to the town and ask them about it? And so the towns, instead of just being asked, oh, would you be interested? They have a specific project to be thinking about, which might help them agree to it. I think in terms of, yeah. So that was my hope, is that it would be part of the planning process to just support that discussion, so that by the end of the plan, you know, when the plan's signed, we have a sense of which towns are going to be willing and what projects we can start working on. or if we need to start working on additional project because the town is willing, but we don't have anything in mind. So wait for Catherine. I think she'll be the one to coordinate a discussion as part of the Tactical Basin Support Grant. And if anybody like Alaire wants to be part of it, anybody on the board, let us know.
Yeah, no, thanks, Karen. I think that sort of aligns with what I was saying at the end there about like what I view as the best way of going about like developing and matchmaking these projects is really starting with, you know, where are the eligible loans to sponsor WISPr projects, and are the towns willing, you know, what kind of project do they have in mind, or do any of you, are any of you aware of that could fit with that?
And sorry for jumping in, Catherine, but I don't know if you connected the dots, but Heidi is with Swanton Village, which is one of the communities that's on the list of good candidates for hosting projects at $4.5 million, which would mean.
Yeah, that would be great.
Let's chat.
Yeah, for sure.
Kent, do you want to wrap things up?
Okay, I didn't know if Catherine was finished. If we are finished with questions for Catherine, I think that we are at the end of our agenda. Is there any other business before we adjourn?
There were a few updates that I was going to provide, some of which are the same or similar to what some of you had heard at the last Lamoille Council meeting. And so I'm going to, if I can, quickly run through those. Excuse me. So one of the things I wanted to update folks on is the clean water service provider had been working under kind of an informal policy regarding cost effectiveness thresholds. And we've been getting closer to having a written policy, and there's going to be, this is something I've learned I can email out this afternoon. So you will see the text of the document that is what is going to be considered by Catherine for signature. And so what is in that policy is that there would be thresholds of $50,000 per kilogram for stormwater projects and $30,000 per kilogram for all other projects. And basically, it's meant to give people a clearer path. If you have a project that pencils out at costing more than $30,000 per kilogram, then the clean water service provider is probably not going to be your first stop as part of funding. So that's the first update that I wanted to share. And like I said, I'll be able to email out the text of the document that Catherine is intending to sign. The other thing I wanted to touch on as an update, I forgot twice to send these out. It had been suggested that the members of the Basin Councils, it wasn't yesterday afternoon, it was this morning that I finally remembered to send to you this memo that documents the process that the first QUISP that had to get its renewal, it documents that process. So if you are interested in it, please take a look at the memo. If you have any questions, let me know. It pertained to the Addison Regional Planning Commission, which is the clean water service provider for the Otter Creek Basin. The QUISP role for the Missisquoi is not up for renewal until 2027. So there's a bit more time for that, but I just thought I would share that because it had been suggested that we do that. And then the other thing that I was going to touch on is communication efforts. And I think Nora is still on the line. She's been participating in a group that's working on developing communications materials and such. So I think, Nora, if you are still here, could you just say a few words about that?
Yeah, I can say a few words. I can also, Catherine and Karen are also part of this group.
That's funny.
So
That's right. It's the gang who's here. You have a quorum. This is an illegal meeting.
Yeah, so
Actually, as chair, could I butt in for just a second? I did not properly thank Catherine King for her presentation and working with us today. And at this portion of the meeting, if you're not participating moving forward, you're very welcome to stick around, but if you need to go, we certainly understand. So thank you for coming.
Thanks for
Thank you.
pointing that
Thank
out,
you.
Jen.
No problem. I'll hear what Nora has to say about the communication since I'm involved with that too. So
Okay.
yeah, so we are part of a communications working group focusing on some WISP-wide communications efforts. We had a meeting with the new, maybe help me out here with her title, but Rebecca Kelly is the new, she used to be the governor's communications officer, and she now has a communications role at the state. And she met with us to discuss creating sort of an overarching campaign to promote water quality stewardship more broadly. So that's kind of one component of what we've been doing, but also we're working on just getting some very basic fact sheets and things like that to sort of educate the public on what a QUISP is and what this funding source can do. So we don't have any materials to share yet, but keep an eye out for that. Hopefully soon. Karen or Catherine, if you have any updates.
sounds good. Thanks.
Sounds great.
Great.
And if I can just say a couple more things before a motion to adjourn would be in order. This group has talked in the past about the public participation plan or policy that the Regional Planning Commission was working on. I just wanted to bring that up again. It's something that was adopted by the Regional Planning Commission board back in the fall. And the plan has language in it that says that part of the implementation of that plan is to get it out to committees. And so I'm going to be transmitting copies of that. I think I've alerted people to it before, but I haven't actually transmitted copies, and then I'm going to do that shortly. And then I had asked Catherine for some advice on the implementation of that. And one of the things that she encouraged me to do is to just pass along that recipients of QUISP funds are encouraged to look at that document, and in particular the spectrum of participation. It's a table that some of you are familiar with, and consider the spectrum of participation as you are putting together your projects and trying to determine the level of involvement that should be done. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that. It's been a little while since we talked about it, and I will be following up with a copy so that I'm sure everybody has it, and it may be a topic at an upcoming meeting.
Thank you, Dean. I don't see any hands raised or any questions. Is now an appropriate time for me to call for a motion for adjournment?
Yes, I'll just point out the next meeting is June 4th, and the next funding round will open up on April 16th. Yes.
All right, thank you for that. And for the record, may I have a motion and a second for adjournment? I recognize Dan is making the motion. And I see Ted's hand up as seconding the motion. If there's no discussion, all in favor of adjourning, say aye or raise your hand. And I'm supposed to count this out. I see Lauren, Dan,
Sorry.
Sarah, Alaire, Beth,
No.
Heidi. I don't have my glasses on, so if I mess up, I mess up.
Ken, I think
we're unanimous.
Ken.
Are there any natives?
Ken.
Yes.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Sorry. Dean, I don't know if there's anything. I'm going to be submitting a application at the next WIC meeting for a project that will be on the land of someone that works
for the NRPC. Dean, I don't know if there's anything that we could do today to make sure that that process for next time is clear and smooth. That's the only thing I want to bring up.
Okay, yeah. So what Lauren is referring to is that there is this quirk because of who the landowner is. When there's a motion if it's made to approve the funds, it will simply have to acknowledge the fact that the landowner is someone who works at the Northwest Regional Planning Commission. And so, yes, so she's aware, you are aware, and that will be part of the motion.
Okay, that sounds great. I didn't know if there's anything background that we needed to do in advance. That sounds great.
Well, I think it's probably good to give people a heads up so that next time people will remember, oh yeah, they talked about how there needed to be this weirdness to our motion.
Thanks, everybody. Sorry for ruining your count, Kent.
Well, it's not a problem. Your hand was in front of the window and I couldn't pick up the contrast. Sorry about that, Lauren. Okay, let's try it again. All in favor of adjourning, raise your hand. And I believe the vote is unanimous. We'll call it that. And we will be adjourned for now and looking forward to seeing you next time.